Be human.
Since we're going to be taking a look at the upcoming Oscars through the lens of psychology, we wanted to talk about mental health on screen. As we know, millions of people struggle with depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues. But according to a study published in Variety, 6% of film characters and 25% of TV characters with a mental health condition exhibited violent or aggressive behavior, something that experts say is divorced from reality. The report looked at how shows and movies depict suicidal characters, finding that there were 13 instances of suicide or suicidal attempts in the films they examined and 6 on television. The study also found that most characters with mental health conditions were straight, white, adult males, and few figures were from different racial or ethnic backgrounds. So, Frank, as a consumer of a lot of film and television, what do you make of this study about representation of mental illness in film and television?
I think it reflects the evening news. So we're going to start out with a fire, a car wreck, a murder to get our attention, because that's what gets eyeballs. And if you really represent mental illness the way that I do,
and you represent a lot.
Yes. I know it's rather boring. I've spent a lot of time looking at film and media associated with autism and Asperger's, and I think Temple Grandin, the movie, what was it called? Temple, was one of the best in terms of representing the spectrum, but it's hard to get it right because it's usually not very interesting. And if you're going to get some eyeballs, let's give us Hannibal Lecter. Let's give us some PTSD from Ben Affleck in The Accountant to say, wow, that's pretty interesting. But in general, I think the true mental illness, and it's pretty funny. I was right before this podcast, I was down in the basement talking with our building manager, and he looked at me and he said, do you think everybody has mental illness? I'm like, no, but I think everybody should get into therapy. So that's all I have to say about that, everybody.
I like the part about the basement, personally.
Yeah, without any context or explanation. I was just in the basement.
I'm just going to throw that in there. Talk to a building manager in the basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I agree with parts of what Frank was sharing there. But one of the things I know we've previously spoken about on this podcast is that oftentimes mental health within film and television, it's, they're looking at these diagnostic categories, and often they're going to have somebody that's advising and, trying to get at the issue they're representing more accurately. But it's like they go through all of the check boxes and they make it more dramatic and overemphasize certain things when it's like you're not going to have all of the features of an issue.
I think I'm going to disagree, and here's why.
Okay.
First of all, I don't think that 6% of film characters is to me, that's a pretty low percent. And 25% is a little more on the money. So 6% of film characters, 25% of TV characters. I don't think that's an excessive amount. And we know from research that about 1 in 5 people have some kind of mental health issues that need to be addressed. And so that's about 20% of the population at some level. So that's the first thing I'd say is I don't think that's an excessive amount. The other is that the nature of any kind of drama is that there is some kind of conflict. There's something that needs to be overcome. And so I think mental health issues are one thing among many things that can be used as someone who's creating a story that is an obstacle or a barrier or an issue to be kind of addressed or overcome. So it's perfectly legitimate for fodder for television and film. But the last thing I'll say is Frank's made this point a lot in his talks. And he says if you've seen one person with Asperger's, you've seen one Aspie, not like they're all the same. And so in that sense, I think that's true for people who are depressed, people who have bipolar illness, people who have schizophrenia. It's not like there's this one size fits all or this one depiction. And so in that sense, there's going to be a range of things that are going to be depicted. And in some cases are going to be a little, hew a little more closely to reality, a little less so. But even within that, there's a whole range of variation of what that can look like. So I'm not so sure. I mean, I know we're all about destigmatizing, and I'm that's something I feel passionate about. But I don't think that having depictions of people with mental illness in television and film, even if there's aggressive behavior or things like that, is that far divorced from reality. What do you think?
The only thing I would comment on is, to me, the demographic of it being primarily white heterosexual men, and I feel like film and television oftentimes will find other external conflict for people of marginalized demographics, just in terms of women and equality or racial issues, where for white men, if they really come from a place of a lot of status or privilege, they have to develop some type of internal conflict in some ways. So, but it's also not surprising, since the majority, we've talked about this with the Oscars episode, the majority of content coming out of Hollywood may lean towards directed by white men, written by white men, so starring white men. It makes sense that they would represent the most of that. I think it's a challenge. I think both sides are kind of right, because if you're going to make mental health or mental illness a central component of a storyline, don't be a hack. Don't be lazy about it. Like, if somebody's showing aggressive or violent behavior, if it lends to the story and the character, I tend to be okay with it, because it seems to be thoughtful and it comes from a place of like natural consequences of what they're going through. But when it's sensationalized or it's provoking for provoking's sake, then I tend to have a little bit more issue with it, because then it just feels like they're using it as a just sort of a cheap device, rather than, I don't think art always has a responsibility to represent mental health or mental illness accurately either. But I guess I am kind of sensitive when it's lazy more than anything.
There's nothing in the study that suggests the quality of it. So we don't know that. And so that's the thing. To say that 6% of individuals with mental illness depicted in film have some kind of aggressive behavior, and that's somehow divorced from reality, I would say not inherently, not just based on those data points that we have.
I guess I just get hung up on the aggression piece, because I don't think a quarter of the population that has a mental health disorder is going to be aggressive. But I just don't see that, and maybe I need to do some updated research. But
right. I think that part is maybe for television characters, and I think there's a reason why there's more of that in television. By the nature of television, that it's episodic and it has to go on for long periods of time. You have to find other things to kind of build conflict around. But I think, let's just take the film piece of it. Having people who have some form of mental illness, that only 6% shows some kind of aggressive behavior, when the nature of film and storytelling is around conflict, that doesn't seem to me to be overly excessive, and it doesn't speak to the quality of it. We don't know if it's, as Jonathan's saying, hackish or not. We don't know if it's poorly researched or not by that data. So that's what I'm saying. I think it's problematic to say any negative depiction of someone with mental illness, just like any negative depiction of fill in the blank, is inherently biased or wrong. That to me is also problematic. Yeah.
The only other thing I'd be interested in is, like, who's accumulating this data? Is it somebody that's trained with any type of mental health background, or is it a data analysis that's just looking at something going, oh, that's violent behavior, oh, that's aggressive, without really being able to understand what they're collecting?
Yeah, and to that point, there are people who have mental health issues in television and film that are never given a formal diagnosis. It's just that's depicted. So how is that coded? Is that someone just making a judgment about that or not? So good stuff.
Thanks for watching this Being Human segment from the Shrink Tank podcast. To watch the full episode, click here, or to check out previous episodes, click here.